There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So, how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that will lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of the comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. Today we're going to talk about disruption. Now, it feels to me like disruption is everywhere, in every corner, in every aspect of every business, whether that's driven by customer demands, by shareholder concerns, by AI, by new entrants in the market. There are just so many forces that are driving everybody towards to being disrupted in their business. So the point of the conversation is, what do we now know about how disruption works? What do we do about it? What are the big lessons and insights about how to manage through disruption? And I think, what I see too often, and I think my guests will agree with this, is that people assume the disruption is not going to happen to them. And then they are quite surprised by what indeed does happen. So let's try to unpack that and understand that from a historical point of view. So my guest today is uniquely qualified for this conversation, Scott D. Anthony. He's now a clinical professor of strategy at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. His research is always focused on adaptive challenges and disruptive change. He's the author of 9 books. This is his 9th, Epic Disruptions, 11 Innovations That Shaped Our Modern World. And I should say, before he went into the business school, he had 20 years at a company called Innosight, which is a growth strategy consultancy originally founded by the former Clayton Christensen, who was a Harvard Business School professor. Many know him. I admire his work tremendously. Scott also served as managing partner for Innosight for a number of years. And importantly for us, Thinkers 50 named him as the world's 9th most influential management thinker in 2023. Scott, welcome to the conversation. And what an accolade. My goodness.
And Wanda, you buried the lead. We worked together. That's worth letting people know. So we're not people who've never met each other before. We actually did some collaborative work, both externally and internally. So it's a pleasure to be here.
It's good to have the conversation with you. And it's exciting to talk about this because I think too few people are thinking about disruptive forces. And I think they don't see them coming, and then they don't understand the long-term consequences of some of those disruptive forces. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with sort of the fun story. You've written enough books. You don't need to write another one. Why this one?
So let me split this question into 2 parts. First, why I wrote it. Second, why I'm happy I wrote it. And the reason I do that is the why behind it is maybe unexpected. It's not the book that I actually proposed to my publisher. I had just come off the consulting career that you talked about. I'd started teaching at Tuck. I designed this class, Leading Disruptive Change. I really loved the class. And I pitched the idea of writing a book based on the class. And the publisher said, that sounds great. However, we have another idea for you. They had just named disruption one of 4 ideas that influenced the business world in the past 100 years. And they said, we thought it'd be interesting to do kind of a history book about disruption, and who better than you? And at first I'm like, no, that's not the book I want to do. I've never done a history book. I'm not a historian. And then I thought, you know what? I've not done a book like that before. Maybe it would be fun. Maybe I would learn something. And then the second part, why I'm glad I did it, it taught me so much. We're in a world right now that is characterized by uncertainty. It's like a fog has descended and we don't know what to do. Well, history can be a really powerful lens that can help you see the present more clearly. And the research and writing of the book taught me that.
That's interesting. And you go way back in history. We're not talking about what happened 10 years ago. You go way, way back, like very early. Why so far back in history? What's the importance of that?
Well, so when I was collecting the 11 stories for the book, a little random walkie, a little scientific, I cracked open Clay Christensen, who you mentioned, who was a mentor, colleague, co-author, friend of mine. I cracked open his second book, The Innovator's Solution. There was a compendium of 100 years of disruptive innovations and picked 4 from that list. That's not enough to make a book. So I said, I got to go further back and started thinking about the greatest hits in history, things like the printing press and gunpowder and so on. And then said, yeah, we need some things that are a little bit different. And then you get things like Florence Nightingale and Julia Child, which nobody sees coming. And you get this nice sweep where the deep history can teach us really unique things. And the thing that I push myself to do with great help from editors and people who reviewed the book is say, okay, let's spend maybe 60% of the chapter laying out the history. Then let's talk about for 20%, how does this echo today? So, how do we see an echo from gunpowder in the present moment of today? And then 20% reflecting. What does this all tell us about the past, present, and future of disruption?
Right. Okay. Then let's talk about that. Let's dig into what you discovered in the writing of the book, because you said it surprised you that you discovered things you weren't quite anticipating. And then we're going to talk about a couple of stories, including Julia Child. So, nice tease. Why does Julia Child appear in a book about disruptive innovations? Okay. So, first off, start with me. What have we misunderstood about disruption? What are we getting wrong?
So, first, let's make sure we all have common terms of reference. So let me introduce the idea of disruption from just giving a quick tour of history of my family. So, my father was born in 1947. In 1947, there was exactly one computer in the world. It weighed 20 tons. It was in a centralized location. My father would never see it. I was born in 1975. Now there are tens of thousands of computers in the world. They've gotten smaller, but I still wouldn't see them because they're in centralized locations in corporations. My daughter Holly is born in 2007. Now there are hundreds of millions of computers on desktops and laptops. And of course, 2007 is the year Steve Jobs and Apple gives us the iPhone. Today, there are billions of computers in our pockets and our hands. The first computer was 20 tons. The first iPhone was 20 ounces. This is disruptive innovation. Take things that were complicated and expensive, make them simple and affordable, change market dynamics, drive explosive growth. That's the basic idea. What do we get wrong? The biggest thing we get wrong is we use the dictionary definition of disruption and apply it to anything that's going on in and around our industry or space. So, the thing that I talked about, the phenomena, is someone coming in and changing the game by playing it differently. When we call everything disruptive, that means nothing is disruptive and we don't know how to identify it. We don't know how to manage it. We don't know how to go and defend if we need to, attack if we should. We really make some really big fundamental mistakes. And I think that leads into something you talked about in your introduction. People say, well, this doesn't really apply to me because I'm not in the same circumstance. Today, to a degree, everyone is dealing with these kind of dynamic changes because of all the different technologies that are taking place in our world. Just one way to think about it. In 1620, Sir Francis Bacon, in his magnum opus Novum Organum, said there have been three things in world history that changed the appearance and state of the entire world. Three things: the printing press, gunpowder, the compass. Today, we can think about artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, additive manufacturing, augmented reality. I'm at four, and I have not left the letter A. This is our world today. Disruption is everywhere.
Everywhere. Okay, I think the temptation also is to say that disruption is something my CEO and chief strategy officer should be thinking about. That's their job, not mine. But I think part of the argument I'd like to encourage people to consider is disruption is happening everywhere, in every job, in every way. And you don't have to be the head of strategy or the head of the organization to begin to see what's disrupting your day-to-day work and what do you want to do about it. Now, you agree or you disagree with that?
I could not possibly agree more. And I would add to that, not only do you have to think about how it's changing your day to day work and how you think about it at the level of your individual work, your team, your group, your department, whatever, but when you leave your office or shut down your Zoom or Teams or whatever, and you go to life and you go to spouse, sibling, child, pet, disruption is changing how we work, live, play, communicate, do everything in our lives. So we have to understand those forces because we're humans. And when we first see any kind of big change that threatens the status quo or changes dynamics, our natural tendency is to shrink away from it. It's the status quo bias. We all suffer from it. I do too. The first time I took a robo taxi, I read about it in the book. My palms got sweaty. I got nervous. I lived my life doing this, but still I'm a human. And we have to figure out how to get over this fear and find ways to thrive in a very dynamic, very disruptive environment.
What it means to, I mean, so the resistance, it's not resistance, the fear is real for everybody. Now the question is, what do you do with that fear? I think is the interesting question. So how do I live in the world in which is there and act on it? Okay, let's move forward rather than get into philosophy about how we live our life. I want to move forward and say, I want to ask a highlight question at first. What did you learn? You look at these 11 cases, you dig through what really happened, what the knock-on consequences are for today, and the lessons learned. Distill it down for me. What did you learn?
I would say the single biggest thing that surprised me that I learned from the research and writing was the downside, the dark side of disruption. Look, I'm a believer. I believe disruption makes the world a better place. It's an engine for progress. It opens up markets. It is a powerful democratizing force. I believe, and I still believe in all of those things. But the deeper you go, the more you see that there is a shadow cast by disruption. That can be because as it's driving change in an industry, there are winners and there are losers. It can be when disruption is changing dynamics in a market, it's discombobulating, it's really messy in that market. It can be what we just talked about for an individual. Your very sense of self, your identity is tied to yesterday and today, tomorrow as disruption changes can be the thing that changes or drives identity threat, and it can be really scary. So I think understanding what I call in the book the shadow cast by disruption is incredibly important because if we don't see that shadow, it can swallow us, it can slow us down, it can stop us. If we see it, understand it, and overcome it, then we get the upside, the potential, the positivity of disruption.
Okay. All right. So let me see if I can summarize, Scott, here without losing any of the core parts. One of them is the definition of disruption is really something that comes in and dramatically changes the market and opens up whole new possibilities in ways we hadn't anticipated. So it's not just any change, it's one that really rattles, shakes, moves a market to a whole new place. Okay? Two, as human beings, we all have this anxiety around change. It shakes up the status quo, and there's that moment of, is this going to be okay? So we have to recognize that that is normal, so it's easy to ignore it. Three is this disruption force hits everybody in every way in their lives, personally and professionally. And then four is there is a shadow side always to the disruption. You need to anticipate that. Otherwise, you miss managing the disruption in a way that's going to be the most productive. Did
Wanda, I feel like we need to write a book together that was so beautifully synthesized. Absolutely. You hit four nails on the head.
Okay. So now I got to have a case. Let's start with Julia Child because we teased that one already. What an interesting one to choose. Why did you pick that one?
I really love the Julia Child chapter for a lot of reasons. So why did I pick it? Well, I'm looking for something where there is someone who is driving disruption that you don't see coming. And the things that you don't see coming often teach us the most. People will say, well, Julia Child, disruption, how do those two things go together? Well, before she wrote with Simca Beck and Louisette Berthold the book Mastering the Art of French Cooking in 1961, if you lived in suburban America and you wanted to have great French food, what did you do? Maybe the city that you lived in or you lived near had a great French restaurant, maybe not. You had to really get on a plane and go to France or get on a boat and go across the ocean and get to France. Those are your options. So in classic disruptive fashion, she took what was complicated and expensive and made it simple and affordable. And then of course, goes from writing cookbooks to going on television, further democratizing cooking, showing that anybody can be a great chef. So I think number one, it helps to illustrate that disruption comes in lots of forms and flavors. And again, you don't have to introduce a new technology product to embrace the power of disruptive change. And then the story itself demonstrates some of the persistent patterns of disruption. One of the things I say in the book is that you cannot fully predict disruption. It's not Newtonian physics. It is predictably unpredictable because there are patterns behind it. And Julia Child really illustrates those very sharply. I'll just share one of them, just in the interest of not going on too long. 1961, I mentioned, was when the book came out. it was not a straight line, easy path to success. In 1951, Julia Child meets the co authors. They agree they're going to work on a book together. The two other authors had already progressed in their book. They're both French. They wanted an American voice in the project. 1954 is when they say their publisher will bring the book out. Of course, that didn't happen. They had to switch publishers twice. There was a near death experience in 1959 where Houghton Mifflin took the 750 pages that had been carefully created and said, "This is unpublishable." This idea that there's going to be setbacks and stumbles and course corrections on the way to success is an incredibly persistent pattern, reminding us that disruption rewards those who are patient and persistent in the face of these struggles. There's more to the Julia Child story, but that piece I think is really important for people to remember.
Yeah, you read the story either in the book or any other event about Julia Child's life and the progression and all the setbacks that you went through. I'm not sure, I'm pretty fortuitous. I'm not sure I would have stuck through with all of those different twists and turns. She really had some tough going, including being rejected by the French cooking schools as a legitimate cook. And for the point of technical expertise, let's remind ourselves that she was a horrendous cook at the start of this. She was not skilled at all, which is amazing that she then goes on
It
to
really
produce
is.
this.
You get to some of the details. The first meal she cooked for her husband, Paul Child, was brains simmered in red wine. No idea why she picked it. And she admitted it's a disaster. The joke in Paul Child's household is she couldn't successfully boil water. So this is somebody who goes on to change the world through cooking. So the question for an individual is, do you have something like that in you where enough work and a lot of help too? Important to note, she's not doing this on her own. Her husband, Paul, super supportive. She's got co-authors. She's got mentors. You got people who are supporting the journey. Do you have that inside you? And if you're a leader in an organization, do you have Julia Childs in your midst that have this amazing potential that you just haven't seen and you got to help bring it out? I'm sure every organization does.
Well, I'm sure if you were trying to manage Julia Child at the moment in this point in history, before she was famous, she would have been royally difficult to deal with because there was a persistence, a determination to do it over and over and over again, get it wrong, get it wrong, get it wrong, get it wrong again. And finally, I mean, we can reward that when we know it's been successful. It's rather difficult as a manager on the journey to success to stick with it. So there's an interesting lesson there as well. I think one of the things that's least appreciated about her is the innovations she really created. So there is the bringing French cooking to the American household at a time when there were just not available. There was nothing like it. But there's also the TV show host. She recorded these live too. I hadn't realized until reading your story. So she made mistakes on air. That's like reality TV before reality TV is a thing. So there's a lot of changes she made.
For sure. And the thing that people really appreciated about that too is when she made mistakes, it wasn't, oh, I made a mistake, let's go back. It's life happens. Pick up food off the floor and eat it. Figure out a way to turn a mistake into a benefit. Look at the camera and wink and just really bring the viewer into the discussion. And that mindset that unexpected things will happen. You have to a degree, expect the unexpected and find ways to say, can I see the positive in this? I was even thinking about Julia Child a couple days ago. I was going to give a speech to a couple hundred people. I show up and they say, oh, we're not sure if the projector is going to work. And I, of course, had carefully created these slides and all that. And my first feeling is heart drops to my stomach, of course. But then I'm like, okay, what would I do if there was no projector? I'd have some fun with it. We'd have just a discussion. And I can then challenge myself to say, can I do a keynote with 200 people for an hour with no slides? And what's the worst that will happen? I know it's all going to be okay. And I kind of felt like I was channeling a little bit of Julia Child in that moment. The projector in the end worked and everything was okay.
Sometimes I think the best talks are the ones where it goes awry like that and you carry on with it. There's a human element to it. All right, so we have a person who's incredibly persistent with a number of setbacks. We have somebody who's inventing as she goes. We have somebody who starts out not being a technical expert and learns to become a bit of an expert, and in a way then can translate that for people who don't know what all of this is about in a kind of orderly way for doing it. We have somebody who masters the how do you write a modern recipe and instructions. So there's a lot of things that she's done here. Are there other lessons we want to take away from her?
Well, I think one other thing that I would highlight, so you can look at the Julia Child story and say, gosh, she was awfully lucky that she showed up in France in 1948 and went to this restaurant that overwhelmed her senses and started the journey. Awfully lucky that she did ultimately get into Le Cordon Bleu. Ultimately lucky that even though she failed the test the first time, she passed it the second. Lucky that she had this friend, Avis Devato, who made these publishing connections. Lucky she blah, 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 blah. That's one version of the story. Another version of the story is to say that she helped to create her own luck by creating the surface area where good things could happen. Intensely curious. She was always trying to do new things, to meet new people, incredibly collaborative, working with other folks, always trying to imagine herself as the person cooking at home, being very focused on the end customer, and being really good at running focused experimentation. By doing all of those things, she created more connections. She created a network. She created possibility. Avis Devato, it's one of the best little stories. So Avis Devato is somebody who helped connect her to a publisher at the last minute. When she's rejected by Houghton Mifflin, she knows Judy Jones and Alfred Knott. She makes the connection. How did Julia Child know Avis Devato? Well, she read this article in Harper's Magazine in the early 1950s about the sorry state of U.S. cutlery. Who knows why, but anyway, she was struck by the article and she wrote a letter to the person who wrote the article. It was Avis Devato's husband. She wrote back. They became pen pals. They wouldn't meet for years, but it was the action to say, I'm going to respond to this. I'm going to write a letter. She wasn't trying to create a connection. She was just interested and she followed it. Those behaviors, the curiosity, the collaboration, the following through, the running experiments, the trying things, those are all behaviors that anyone who's trying to get better at innovation can do. And Julia Child displays them beautifully.
That raises a question I want to ask in general. So we tend to believe when we look at disruption, we look at the innovator, the Steve Jobs, the Julia Child, the person. And especially in Western culture, we like to put that in the form of a hero or heroine. That person single-handedly, charges forth and makes things happen. Is that really the truth? Is it a sole person?
Well, Wanda, this is another thing that the research really taught me. Of course, every story has to have a protagonist. Everything will have someone who carries more than their share of the load. But even the stories that are mythically told about lone inventors are totally false. There are heroes, and it is plural. The one that really cemented this for me was Johannes Gutenberg and the printing press. I kind of had this vision, it's in the 1430s and 40s. Of course, it's just this one dude working alone. Totally false. In 1437, he finds a couple business partners. They're working not on the printing press, but a completely different venture. That venture fails because the plague breaks out. Different story for a different day. So they pivot in modern terms to work on the printing press. This guy, Konrad Sospat, shows up. He's got this innovative press that he can use. Johann Fuss provides the funding. Nicholas of Cusa is an early customer. There's a whole cast of characters here. And that's true of every single story. And the other thing you see too is these stories have really deep roots. So the Apple iPhone, I won't go through all the details, but in the book, I traced the screen, the Gorilla Glass on the screen back to 1952. So yes, of course, you've got Steve Jobs as a person, but there's tens, dozens, hundreds, thousands of people at Apple doing things for the whole device. And then you've got the whole parallel story about a component for it. So heroes, plural, for sure.
Right, plural. I am coming to believe that really successful top teams, great top teams, are not this whole massive everybody come together, but instead it's twos and threes that really collaborate closely with each other, very, very strong, and they sweep the tide of everybody else pulling in to work with them. Brad Borkin has written a lovely book. It's called It Takes Two or Three, which is about some major inventions that happen in the world and largely dispelling the myth that it's the hero, saying it's always two, sometimes three, and in that orbit, they pull in resources from various places to make things happen. I don't know if 2 or 3 is the right number, but I'm with you. I cannot, not today. It cannot be so low. There's no way a one person can
You
really
know,
shepherd
you
this.
took me to the transistor story, which I, without going through the details, it's the transistor troika. It's three people. It's Shockley, Bardeen, and Brattain that do the original work that lays the foundation for the transistor. I've not read that book, but I will. It resonates with me for
It's,
sure.
I think it's really powerful. And I think that power of three, and I know that power of three in any organizational group, how powerful that can be to shift the tide of what we're going to do or not do or think about or not think about. So I think there's more to it. To be continued. There's more to write on that one, more to say on that one. Let's get back to the cases. I want to do one more story. Tell me about the Model T. And again, why that story or why that event?
Yeah, so the Model T was actually one of the first ones on the list. It's a pretty classic example. You have an industry that is very nascent, where most of the cars that exist are very complicated and expensive, and only the wealthy can afford them. And Henry Ford's vision is the car for the great multitudes, and his singular focus was let's drive the price down. And we know the highlights of the story: the assembly line, paying workers a fair wage, and he achieves his vision. So that part I think we all understand. The thing that I thought was really interesting was the knock-on effect, the second order effect, the shadow, and what it takes to get through it. So let's go to the 1920s in major cities in the United States. There is chaos on the street. Henry Ford had achieved his vision. The Model T, when it first came out, was $30,000 in today's terms. It's down to $5,000. Sales are taking off. Problem: cities are built for horses and people, not for cars. And without all the things that we take for granted today, there is literally chaos on the street. There were cartoons that compared cars to modern day Molochs, where people would go and sacrifice children to them. Protests on the street. There was this strange PR battle that broke out where the motorists said the problem are the pedestrians. So we're going to call them something. We're going to call them jaywalkers. Jay is a country bumpkin. Walker is somebody who walks. That's not something you want to be. They get the Boy Scouts to hand out cards. The pedestrians fight back. They say, well, it's the automobile drivers that are the problem. Let's call them flivver boobs with two V's, flivver boobs. Flivver was old slang for a car. Boob, well, that goes without saying. You go and type in flivver boob, you get red squiggles underneath it. We know who won that PR battle. That's just one piece of it. What else was required? Well, we needed technology, things like traffic lights. We needed norms, like when we get to an intersection, who goes first and how do we turn? We needed regulation, like driver's license and speed limits and so on. I think about this literally every day now as I watch what is going on with artificial intelligence. The idea that we should just take our hands off and let technology work itself out, I think history would judge as one of the stupidest ideas that has ever been pushed forward. The technology, the norms, the regulations are critical to get through the messy middle of any disruptive change.
Right. That's an interesting point. I mean, not only for AI today and the need to be thoughtful about what the regulations and are so on are, but the Model T sales are hampered because people have such a negative attitude about the cars. So figuring out how to make this work is actually effective for driving sales at Ford Motor Company. And the same is true if you look at autonomous vehicles or electric vehicles, all the infrastructure that it takes to make that something people are really willing to try to invest in. I think it's interesting, let alone the regulations and the standards and the expectations and so on.
And the other thing related to that too is, one thing that was so powerful about the Model T is it was a car that a layperson could go and maintain, which was really hard before. So let's go and A, make sure the car is designed in a way that people can maintain it. B, let's go and run clinics. Let's go and sell kits. Let's go and make a whole thing out of this. Just like, as you say, we're seeing with electric vehicles today, charging stations, communication strategies, and so on. It's not enough to just do the technology. That is a piece of it. You have to think about the ecosystem that you're building. My colleague at Tuck, Ron Adner, would appreciate that call out. It's really critical. And you have to think about the hearts and minds of humans as well, because at least for now, that's still an important battle to win.
I think it's always going to be an important battle to win unless
I
you've
sure
got an
hope
army
so.
of robots. I don't think we're going away anytime soon. Other species may disagree with that statement, but I think we're here for the next foreseeable future. So I've got this notion that it's not the sole hero. It's a collection of people, some of whom drop in and out. And I've got somebody who is incredibly persistent with a lot of failures. Henry Ford also had a lot of failures, including losing the company, I think twice, if not three times, before it sort of landed. There's the, yes, technology and innovation or changes that you make, but there's getting people to adopt it, getting people to see the possibility. There's all the regulations around it, the shadows that have to be addressed, called out, talked about, managed in order for that innovation to really, truly flourish. And curiosity. I left out curiosity, collaboration and curiosity.
And curiosity, you could argue, is the thing that drives everything. You see, what is innovation at the heart of it? Innovation is something different that creates value. And you can't do something different if you don't say, well, why are we doing it this way? Or how might we do it differently? Or what if? And that desire just to go and probe and question and sometimes deal with the implications of it. This is another fun historical find, the 1548 proclamation from King Edward VI, or his handlers, since he was 10 years old at the time. The proclamation was against those that doeth innovate. And you might ask, why did the king want to ban innovation? Well, an innovator is questioning the status quo. In 1548, if you're questioning the status quo, who are you questioning? The king or God? And that was viewed to be a heretical act. That was a bad thing. So let's make clear that we don't do that. Now, we don't issue proclamations like that today, but they still feel like they're enforced, don't they, sometimes?
I don't know that we don't issue them, but we certainly do think about them that way. Interesting, fascinating. There was another thought, and I have lost that notion of thought. Focused experimentation, we talked about the curiosity, the willingness to pursue, to keep going, to reinvent. Oh, there was one other thing that's in both the Julia Child stories and the Model T story that I think we're losing track of today, and that's the singularity of purpose. Julia Child had a purpose of bringing French cooking to the average American household. Henry Ford had, let's bring a car to the average person so that they could maintain it, afford it, et cetera, et cetera. That singularity of purpose seems to be a sort of driving force that keeps you going and going and going. Is that true across all the stories?
I have not been asked this question. I'm trying to run them through my mental checklist. I think so. I think it's really hard to do distinctive things if you don't have singularity of purpose. And the thing that I'm pausing at, I'm thinking about the Steel chapter, and the Steel chapter. Anyone who has studied disruptive innovation, anyone who knows Clay Christensen knows his favorite story is steel mini mills disrupting the integrated mills. I flipped that story. So I said, what did it look like from the perspective of the company that got disrupted, and looked at Bethlehem Steel? And the thing that I pause at is Bethlehem Steel had a very singular purpose. We are going to operate at scale, and we are going to be an excellent producer of quality steel at scale. And that purpose was great until it wasn't. So I think one thing that you always have to watch out for is when disruption strikes, do you have to rethink your purpose? And when your purpose is caught up in a specific product or a specific business model, it leaves yourself susceptible to somebody who changes the way that an industry works. If your purpose is broader, Henry Ford's purpose was a car for the multitudes. There's lots of ways that you can do that. Yes, the only hesitation in the answer is the double-edged sword that sometimes exists to anything with singularity.
Okay. That makes me wonder if we should go back and look at the disruptors that failed. And did they get the singularity of purpose wrong? Did they not persist? Were they not curious enough? Did they not have collaborators enough? Like, what is it that they missed? And does that enlighten any of these components? Because I agree with you. The singularity of purpose gets the entire organization focused, your friends and collaborators and everybody. And I think it's what drives your willingness to reinvent again and again and again to still achieve your end goal, your end mission. But if that end mission is a place we don't need to be, we have a problem.
You see me sit up. I'm like, well, epic disruptions. I was going to say two, or maybe the flip side would be, it'd be really fascinating to do deep histories of those that felt like they were on a disruptive track and just fell off it. The idea, the one that came to mind is, I don't know if you remember this, probably 20 years ago or so, SAP executive named Shai Agassi had this idea, Project Better Place, where we're going to disrupt the automobile industry by creating electric batteries that you could swap in and out of cars. So this is before Tesla or anything existed, and hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars invested in the right general space, but the business ended up failing. The question that is going through my mind is, was it the vision was wrong? Was he not able to adapt because he actually raised too much money? Was it just timing? Was it the sort of thing where had he started 10 years later, it all would have worked? Or something else entirely? Google Glass would be in the same general category, the Apple Newton. I don't know. It'd be really fun to go and look at those stories in more depth. Maybe that's the book we should do together.
There you go. That would be a fascinating one to talk about at least. All right, last question, Scott. For the average manager out there, what are you recommending they do? Do more
Well,
of, do less of?
so the thing that I think we need to do a little bit less of is cling to today, cling to the present, cling to the patterns, cling to the false security of doing the same thing we've always done. And so that's less of. The thing that we need to do more of, I go back to one of the themes we've talked about. This is hard. Dealing with disruption is not easy. It's psychologically unsettling, and we need to acknowledge that. The King's Proclamation it echoes in our brain. It can be scary. What's the best way to fight fear? Well, I go back to the little story I told about being scared about the projector not working. My brain tried to turn that into a fun opportunity to learn. It tried to turn it into a game. I think the more that we can embrace fun, optimism, possibility, and begin playing with whatever technology you want to play with, drones, artificial intelligence, alternative proteins, and new lab grown meats, whatever. The more that we have fun doing it, the more there's a glint in our eye when we approach it. I think the easier it is to thrive through today's epic disruptions.
I think that's an interesting idea. As I think about companies now struggling with AI, what does AI mean? How does AI change my job, my role? Does that stay redundant or get redundant, or what does it mean? It reminds me of a CEO that I spoke with yesterday who said, I went to technology and I said, trick me out on every tool you have in the AI space. I want it all right there in front of me, every single piece you can give me, including virtual reality, because I want to experiment. I want to play. I want to try it. I want to see. I want to see if it can help me in my job or in the organization's job. And I just think that attitude of, so let's play, before we're under the gun for cost savings or whatever else comes with it.
What I'm reminded of, I teach a class called Horizon Scanning at Tuck. And one of the things I tell the students to do, I say, pick up a technology that you have read about but not actively use and play with it for a little bit, and then write a report from the future. What might this look like in 5 years and all that. The thing that is a very persistent pattern is every student comes back and says, I had no idea. Reading and using are just, I had notions in my head, but reading and using are two completely different things. I think it's even more important to push this for AI. There's a bunch of people who use AI kind of like other technology tools and then kind of dismiss it because it doesn't work as well as Google at search or whatever. You have to push yourself and keep playing. Ethan Mollick from University of Pennsylvania says the price of admission is 2 sleepless nights just mucking around with it. And that's what I did. I mean, when it first came out in 2022, I did a couple light playing. I was working still on a consulting project, said, can we do an image? And the image was horrible. I was designing a class and said, give me a syllabus, and it was riddled with errors. And part of me is like, okay, good, I still win. But then I said, get over yourself and keep playing. And I did bedtime stories for Teddy and songs with Harry, and then started to say, hey, if you focus in this right way, you can do this. And of course, the technology improves. And just last week, getting ready to teach in the winter, I designed 2 AI tools to help students learn different concepts. And that is not because I'm an expert. It's because I kept playing and mucking around, but to the point where now it's a little bit, actually a lot easier for me to push and do new things, and also recognize where there are limits, where it's just not going to give me what I want. And that's fine. I just won't use it for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Scott, fascinating discussion, as I knew it would be, always is when we sit down to work together or talk together, either one. Scott, if somebody wants to reach out to you, where's the best way to find you?
So LinkedIn, so Scott Anthony, usually add the Tuck because there are other Scott Anthonys out there. So you can find me on LinkedIn. There is a companion website for the book, Epic Disruptions. That is plural with an S because there are 11 in the book.com.
Scott, what a wonderful conversation. I love it. If I summarize this one, it's yes, it feels scary. Get over it and get on with it. So some curiosity, some play, some partners, some collaborators, some persistence, some sense of what are we trying to achieve in using this, what is possible in using this, and look at the dark side, the shadow side, I should say, of what else has to be tackled in order to make this really work and really effective in the organization. So Scott, thanks for being here. It's been a fabulous conversation. Join us next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone, and certainly check out our new YouTube channel, Out of the Comfort Pod. Send us a note. We'd love to hear from you anytime. outofthecomfortzone.com.
Thank you for joining us today. Tune in for another edition next week with Dr. Wanda Wallace on the Voice America Business Channel. Reach outside your comfort zone this week.